Well, I think many of you know, if not most, this last weekend, my daughter spent about 4 days in the hospital, my little 7-year-old, because she had a sinus infection that spread to her eye, which then in turn began to spread into the front part of her brain and was showing concerning signs of bacterial meningitis. She spent a few days in the hospital together. The doctors took care of things. We caught it early, and so everything is looking very positive. We fully expect complete recovery. She's got home care at home now. We're having the nurses come and change the bandages out because she's got a little IV pick line in her arm that goes straight to the heart to feed her the antibiotics she needs. So all things considered, I think it's going to be just fine. But how do you explain that to a little 7-year-old who's wondering why her arm is itchy and she can't scratch it? We're mostly doing well, but it was Sunday night we brought her home. I think Monday was probably one of the worst nights when getting ready to put her in the shower and we have to wrap her arm in like saran wrap and tape just to make sure that no water gets on it, right? And as I'm doing that, she's so itchy and she's crying and she's got giant crocodile tears coming down and but Dad, why? And I'm explaining, because we have to keep the water off of it. No, why? And like, because the PICC line's there to give you the medicine. No, why? And she's asking the big question, why does any of this have to happen at all? And I found myself needing to be just totally honest with her. I don't know. Nothing else would suffice. For the record, that didn't help her either. I don't know why now. I don't know why this moment and this exact experience. I don't know. How could I know? Have you ever wondered why in the midst of something? I think it's a virtually universal Christian experience for us to ask God, and I don't mean the how dare you, God, shaking fist thing. Maybe you've been there. Maybe it's just, God, but why? We ask that question because we endure suffering, we endure trials, and we want to know the purpose behind it. We're in week 3 of a series I've been preaching on suffering. And the reason that I thought this was so important to preach on is because pain has the ability to impact you more than almost anything else that you will ever experience. It's one of the most shaping forces that we will ever endure. When you're under duress, as a believer, you're especially vulnerable to the enemy's attacks. I know that some of you have experienced trauma in your life, like real hardship that left lasting residue. And maybe you even still struggle now to deal with it. You don't even know where to sort it. Some of you may have even had a terrible last week. Some of you had a wonderful last week. Some of you are heading into the worst weeks of your life. You don't even know it yet. Some of you might be the pessimist, walking around just waiting for the boot to drop. Even when things are going really well, you're like, well, until when? And why? Because you know suffering is part of the human existence. And so the point of this series is to help equip you. It's to help prepare you for when that time comes. Because when you get there, I'm concerned that you don't make shipwreck of your faith. Last week, we looked at the story of Jonah in the Old Testament. And we covered the idea of suffering of the kind that is a result of your own sin. See, Jonah suffered because he sinned. The suffering we read about in Jonah's story is entirely self-inflicted. He could have avoided it if he had just obeyed God, at least in that story. And today, we're going to look at yet another story of suffering. Perhaps outside of Jesus' suffering, perhaps the most famous experience of suffering in the entirety of the Bible. We're going to tell you a story about a man named Job. If you have your Bibles with you, you can go to turn to Job chapter 1. We're going to be in that text in a little bit, and I'm going to show you the verses up here when we get to that point. But before we jump into Job chapter 1 and read the text, I just want to give you a bit of the backstory and tell you a little bit about his life. Now, As I was preparing for this, I just read through the whole book of Job this week and thought, oh no, I think I bit off more than I can chew. This is a lot of chapters we're going to cover in a single shot, but I think we can do it. The first half of the sermon today, I'm going to focus on the story of Job. You're going to kind of walk through that with you. And then the second half, we're going to try to apply that. Like, what are we supposed to do with this story? What are we supposed to take from it, okay? So just so you know, that's about the lengths of things we're covering. Job is a man who lived long ago, long before the days of Moses, long before the days of Abraham, and some would even think maybe before the days of Noah. Job might be the most ancient story in the Bible. While Genesis tells us of the origin of our earth, Job may have been written down before Genesis was written down. It goes back a really long way. Job lived in the East. He was a highly respected man. He had a reputation for being blameless, upright, righteous before God. It even says of him that he turned away from evil. That's the kind of man that he was. And he was super wealthy. 10,000 sheep and camels, 1,000 oxen and donkeys, and servants to care for all of those. In addition to all of his material wealth, Job had 10 children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. He was considered, and according to the language of Job itself, it says this: he was the greatest of all the people of the East. That's how he was known. And most importantly, he was a sincerely God-fearing man. One day, a messenger runs in to Job and tells him that a band of raiders has just attacked and stolen 1,000 of his oxen and donkeys, all of them, and killed every one of the servants, and he's the only one left alive coming to tell him. While that messenger is there delivering the news, yet a second messenger comes in. And that one comes in and says, fire from heaven just came down and consumed all 7,000 of your sheep and all of the shepherds that you employ that were watching them. While the second messenger is still saying these things, a third one comes in from outside and starts to tell Job, Job, your enemies from the east came and raided your land, stealing all 3,000 of your camels and killing all the servants. This is all of his material wealth gone. His businesses gone. Livelihood gone. And that's when the fourth messenger comes running in and tells him all 10 of your adult children were celebrating together in a house when a wind knocked it over, killing all of them in an instant. This was overwhelming, devastating loss. This is, I think, the greatest fall in the Bible, the greatest riches to rags story of any human on earth. Having the most down to the least in moments. Job covers himself in sackcloth and ashes, a way of showing mourning. He shaves his head. His own wife tells him to just curse God and die already. Just die. Death would be better. All he had left was his own health and a few friends. And then for no practical or medical reason whatsoever, Job develops excruciating boils and sores from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. The pain, the itching and burning so intense, he breaks pieces of pottery to make little sharp shards and begins scraping himself with them. His closest friends hear of his loss and come to comfort him. Now, the details of Job's initial suffering are told in the first 2 chapters of this story. But the next 35 chapters record the conversation between Job and his friends when they come to give him comfort. And essentially, it goes downhill fast. They show up and they just sit with him quietly for a while. And then finally he starts speaking and he says, why? Why is this happening to me? What is God doing? And slowly at first the friends begin to say, well, Job, we love you. We're your friend. We love God like you love God. But clearly you have sinned. Clearly, Job, because God is just. All of this all of this is your fault. And Job says, no. God and I are at peace. God has forgiven the sins that I brought before him. He's not made anything known to me that should be so big and dramatic that all of this would have happened. No, there's no hidden sin. Everything is laid bare before God. We're at peace together, but why? Why would he do this? And they say, Job, clearly you're lying to us. This is your fault. No, it's not my fault. You don't understand. And this goes back and forth, and it begins to get hot until his friends start being angry at him and saying, it was probably your kids. They're the ones who sinned. That's why all this happened. The ones he's weeping for. And Job says, who do you think you are? Coming here to try to take care of me. You think you know God more than I do? You think that you love him more than I do? You don't think I know about God's justice? There's nothing that I haven't given to him. I don't know why I'm going through this suffering. You're being miserable friends. And they say, miserable? You're the one who's miserable. Your wicked sin has brought this devastation on everyone. You are to blame. 35 chapters, back and forth. Job's friends, and Job replying. They even say, you don't even love God. And Job cries out to God, why? Why has all this happened? Towards the very end of this book, when we get to the 38th chapter, God finally speaks to Job. Job has been crying out, why? Why? Just tell me why. Explain why. Why is this all going down? And when God opens his mouth, it is the longest monologue God gives in the entirety of the Old Testament. God talks more and longer sustained to Job than any other character in the Old Testament by record. And essentially what God says to him is, you can't handle the truth. That's the story. I was reading this week, and I've read the story many times. I was reading it again. I was like, okay, surely God shows up with this sympathetic tone. Surely I've read it wrong in the past. Surely God shows up and says, Job, I know. But that's not what God does. The truth of it, it even says that God says he speaks loudly with a thunderous, booming voice. And he begins by confronting Job. Dress yourself like a man. You've been asking me. You've been challenging me. I will now question you, and you will answer me. Where were you when I created everything that exists, Job? Where were you when I carefully crafted every single aspect of nature, even the things you know nothing about, the things you don't even know exist? Where were you? Where were you when I made every single one of the creatures that exists? From the smallest and seemingly most insignificant to the mightiest, most magnificent. Were you there? Did you make them? Can you command them? Do the stars obey you? Does the snow fall when you tell it to? Do the seas stop where you draw the line? And Job responds at the very end. He says, you were right, God. I was demanding to know things that are far too great for me to comprehend. And the book ends in 2 short paragraphs that wrap it all up, where God restores all of Job's possessions. He doubles his material property and blesses him with 10 more children and a long life of peace. The end. That's the story of Job. Job never got an answer for his suffering. Never once. The friends didn't know. They thought they knew. They didn't know. God does not give him an answer. And Job goes for the rest of his 140 years later and still doesn't know why he suffered. Until the day he died, he wasn't sure. But this book is not silent as to why. And I shared this story this way in this order for a reason. Because this story is unique. Not that Job suffered. Everybody suffers. Perhaps the degree of Job's suffering is greater than any of us will ever experience or have ever experienced. But what makes the story of Job unique is that the book itself, the author who writes this for us, tells us exactly why he suffered in the opening chapters. I want you to go and turn to Job 1. And we're going to read verses 6 through 12 together. You can follow along here with me as well. Let's just read the story. Why? What was happening behind the scenes to cause all this to happen? Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? That there is none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil." Now, if this is new for you to read or consider, we see a snapshot here of what we know as the divine council. This is a heavenly throne room. God is the most high God, angel kind, surrounding him. And the sons of God, that's angels, come to present themselves before the Lord. Satan shows up. He walks in. I don't know if Satan's on the divine council or if he's just permitted to come and give a report. But he walks right on in and he tells God, "I've been walking around the earth, been watching, observing what's happening. I've got a report of all the things," and that's what he's coming to give. And God introduces the name Job. He goes, okay, so you've seen the earth. What about Job? Surely, if you've been on the earth, you've seen and heard of Job. And God gives a judgment on Job. I'll read that again. The Lord said, "Have you considered Job? There's none like him on the earth." You've been throughout the earth? Well, the godliest of all, the most faithful of all was the man named Job. Surely you know of him. Blameless and upright. He fears God. He turns away from evil. So God is making a judgment before all the council. He's saying, "A righteous man of faith who loves me." And this is what Satan says next, verse 9 through 11. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." So what's happening is that Satan is challenging God's judgment. "Oh, God, you think Job is blameless? You think you know his heart? God, I know his heart, and he will turn from you in a second if he loses the blessings you've given to him. I know the heart of a man better than you. I know what motivates him better than you. I am wiser than you." And Satan says all this publicly. He's surrounded by an entire council of sons of God, these angel kind. It's a direct challenge to God's authority, his wisdom, his fitness to rule over the hearts of men. Verse 12 is God's reply. "And the Lord said to Satan, 'Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand.' So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord." Now, if you read through the story, this account will happen twice. He'll go back a second time, say the same thing, and then he'll go and bring the physical harm upon Job, as we heard about earlier. But the massive suffering that Job experiences throughout this book is a direct work of Satan permitted by God. Why does Job suffer? Because Satan is attacking him, and God is permitting it. Why did Job suffer? To answer the cosmic question. And this is one of the most important questions that you will ever answer in your entire life. You have to get this right. And the question is this: is God worthy of worship for who he is, or only for the blessings he gives? Will you love and remain faithful to God even when there are no visible benefits? You see, from the heavenly point of view, Satan was operating under a grand assumption. The same assumption that people everywhere operate under, that God must purchase worship from his creatures. I give you blessing, you give me praise. I give you good, you give me worship. I stop giving you good, you stop giving me worship. This is the way it worked with all of the false gods of all the nations in all of history. You see, Satan believed that God might be worthy of worship, but God, you will never get that worship from them unless you buy it. And the last time that Satan intervened in the affairs of humankind, from his vantage point, he was quite successful. He deceived Eve into believing that God was withholding good from her. She took the fruit and ate, brought it to her husband, and now all the suffering that exists can be traced back to that first lie believed. Is God worthy of worship for who he is, or only for the blessings that he gives? Job's life became a theater for the cosmic realm. His suffering was on display for the angelic beings to see whether or not a human being made of dust, far lower than them, could trust and love God even when the cosmic contract seemed to be broken. That's the heavenly point of view. The human point of view of this is so obvious to us, it almost doesn't need to be stated. Too many of us assume what Satan assumed. Our view of God as worthy is dependent on what he does. And our love for him is conditional. That's why many people read this story and get angry. Did you feel it? Did any of you feel it? Did you think that's unjust? In fact, I know that's how we feel. I have felt that way reading this story. I talk to you guys and hear you say that's how you feel about this story. In fact, somehow we tend to acquire vicarious bitterness on Job's behalf. I know Job ended up okay with it, but I'm not. I'm not okay with it. His kids died. All of the servants died. All of that harm came. For a game? And we acquire vicarious frustration and anger. And that sense, that feeling that you might get even walking through this story is proving that point. Our human vantage point of these things are built on a wrong assumption. That God is not worthy of worship, praise, love, trust, glory, adoration, unless we get good. Is it possible for us to truly see God rightly? Can we, as fallen creatures, see him for who he is in spite of circumstances? You know, many have taken note of just how God responds to Job. All the loss, all the devastation that he endures, and then 35 chapters of his friends just pounding him into the ground. Horrific, horrific. And then God responds, and he sounds harsh. And that's intentional. Have you ever said to God, God, if you just explain why I can endure. If you show me the reason. Remember the first week of our suffering series, I talked through the life of Joseph. Joseph, who was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, finds himself in prison for obeying and honoring God in purity, and eventually at the end is exalted as the second highest ruler over Egypt, saving all of the people, including his own family. And at the end of his life, he says, what the people meant for evil, his brothers meant for evil, God meant for good. If you just show me the end. Show me, God, what the point of this is, and then I can endure. God denies Job even that here. God says, what if I don't? What if I don't tell you? What if I don't explain to you what I'm doing? What if I don't invite you into my wisdom? What if I don't entrust to you all that's about to happen to you? Will you still trust me if I don't meet that demand? Will you? Will you believe that I love you? Will you worship me anyway? God is saying to us, as he says to Job, your love for me cannot hang on your understanding. You see how brittle a hope that would be? You see how fleeting a hope that would be? You know, when I talk with young engaged couples, meet together sometimes for premarital counseling, and one of the very first questions I ask, how do you meet each other? How do you know? We try to go through the story if I don't already know it with them. And I usually turn to the guy first, and I say, why do you love her? Actually, I usually start, why do you want to be married to her? And he goes, well, because I love her. Okay, yeah. Okay. And question 2, why? What do you think you hear? You ever ask someone that? Oh, she's beautiful. She makes me so happy. She makes me laugh. She makes me feel good about me. She makes me love God more. Like, she's good for my relationship with God. And I sit there and I smile and I hear all of it. I expect all of it. All of that. That's a good thing to hear, okay? Not mocking that. And then I say, well, what happens when her beauty fades? What if she doesn't make you happy? What if you think she's not helping you in your relationship with God? What if she doesn't make you laugh anymore? And usually his mind is like, oh. You see, that may be love. I think it's love. I'm not mocking it. But that's not the kind of love that lasts. It must mature. It must develop to something deeper. The greatest answer I ever heard to that question was, why do you love her? I don't know. I just do. It's the best answer. I just do. It's not about what she does for me. It's not about what she gives to me. It's not about what I get from her. I just love her. And you see, that's the kind of way we have to think about our relationship with God. I love him. Not, I love him when, fill in the blank. I love him if. I love that I feel so close to him. What if you don't feel close to him? What will you do? I love him. I'm grateful for all the blessings. I love all the good things. Well, that's good that you love that he's blessed you. But what if he doesn't bless you? What if you lose all of those things? You see, if your love for God hinges upon your resolve, if it hinges upon your reception of good or seeing him as lovable, that you get something, it won't last. And so the question remains, is it possible? Is it even possible for us to love God like this, to worship him, to honor him, even when all that we have is taken away? And God does not pick any random person on earth. He selects Job because he does know the heart of a man. And all of heaven views, and you and I today read and view Job's response. I want to show you chapter 1, verses 20 through 22, how Job responds to the loss of his children especially. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb. Naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. Here's the bitter truth of it. Some suffering comes without explanation. Some suffering you don't have a reason for. Some suffering God won't give you a reason for. In fact, he never promises that he will. He never says, listen, you're going to go through hard times. Just ask me, I'll tell you exactly what's going on. I'll tell you precisely the plan. We know more about Job's suffering than he ever did because we're given this heavenly vision. We're reading it on record right here. But that doesn't mean there's no reason. You see, Job never knew. His friends never knew. His family never knew. His children that raised up and he told them about what had happened to him never knew. The people around who knew of his reputation trusting God never knew. We know. Was there a reason? Of course there was. And I don't think you and I could even fully understand. But Job's story gives us a picture of suffering that seems to come without explanation. You have to know this kind is out there. It's the hardest kind to deal with. Why did Joseph suffer? Because people sinned against him. They wronged him. If you get punched in the face, you don't go, why does my jaw hurt? You go, because of his fist. That's why it hurts. He sinned, I'm in pain, right? Why did Jonah suffer? Because he sinned. He took his hand, smacked it with a hammer. You don't go, why? Because, duh. And here's Job. Why? Why did Job suffer? From every human point of view, Job included, I don't know. Well, did you talk with God? Yeah, for quite a bit, actually. Did he tell you? No, actually, come to think of it, he never did. Are you okay with that? And Job says, yes. Because these things are too wonderful for me. They're too grand for me. They're too big for me. Job had no idea why he was suffering. His friends thought they knew, but they were wrong. And I couldn't preach through this without taking a quick moment to talk about his friends for a second. Because you will personally experience suffering, but probably more often you will be friending somebody who's experiencing suffering. Make sense, right? If your friend group all experiences their share of suffering, you're going to experience that with them and then you're going to experience your own. So you're going to experience more through others. Don't be a terrible friend like this. Don't be like Job's friends. This is a bit of the cautionary tale behind all of what's going on with Job's friends. They're terrible to him. And actually it says in one of the chapters regarding why it is they're acting this way, that understanding was kept from them, and that's why they treated them this way. In other words, I believe that Satan was at work keeping them from being the good friends they were supposed to be. It was a part of his suffering. It didn't come after it. It was the culmination of it. And the interesting thing about Job's friends is they were theologically right about almost everything they said about God. Almost everything. In fact, if you just flip through Job and just drop your finger down and read that couple sentences, it is almost certainly completely true statements about God. Some of the most powerful statements about God's justice and his righteousness and his creative ability and his love for good and his hatred for sin are found spoken by Job's terrible friends. You reap what you sow, they say. That is true. God loves justice. That is true. God hates sin. That is true. Hidden sin will catch up with you. That is true. If you're harboring hidden sin, you need to repent. It's the only way out. That is true. Where they were wrong is how they applied it to Job. They assumed that Job was under God's judgment for sin, and they were wrong. They were wrong. God even says as much in the end. He says, Job, you were right. When you said I was not bringing this on you for sinful judgment on your sin, you were right. They were wrong about me. They were wrong. That's why you were suffering. And Job prays for his friends and sacrifices for his friends, and God forgives Job's terrible friends. But don't be like them. As a friend, be super slow. First thing, be super slow to try to diagnose somebody else's suffering. Be super slow to do it. There are times that it might be really obvious, but still be slow. Be slow to judge another person's suffering. Job's friends have gone down in history as some of the worst friends in the entirety of the Bible. Maybe the worst collection of friends that we've got. And they're all Christian. I mean, like, this is before the days where Jesus was given the name and Jesus. But they were Christians. They were believers. They feared God. And they're probably up in heaven with him. Hey, so Job, so about that. Right? One of my favorite verses in the discourse between Job and his friends is this one in Job 6, because it's so applicable. Look at Job 6, verse 26. Job says this: do you think that you can reprove or rebuke words when the speech of a despairing man is wind? And here's what he's saying. He's saying, I'm so filled with grief and mourning and sadness that stuff is just spewing out of me. And I might even be saying stuff that's not precise and not fully accurate. And I'm just angry and hurt. Don't pin me down. They're just words. I'm just venting. I'm angry. They'll blow away with the wind. We should learn this. We should learn that there are many true things you can say to somebody when they're suffering that you should just shut your mouth about. Look, you could be in a fight with your wife, and then at the heat of it you go, you deserve hell. Theologically true? Good timing? Shut your mouth. Guys, there will be times where we're going to experience brothers and sisters in struggle, and they're going to come to you, and they're going to be cussing. They're going to go back to an addiction that they had forsaken for a long time because they're just so burdened. They might even say untrue things about God and the way they're thinking about him, and God hates me. This is proof of it. Look at this. Church discipline on you. How heretic, out of the church. Pause. Guys, we have to be gentle and gracious with a wounded, hurting person. Never, ever ought we be like Job's friends. When one member suffers, the others fact check his inaccuracies. No. When one member suffers, the rest suffer together. Job's friends started well. It said they showed up to give him sympathy and compassion. They actually sat silently with them for a week. Good job, guys. Just keep doing that. That's what we need to be. Bear with people. Give them compassion and grace. And what you need to know about your suffering, if it's the kind that just doesn't seem to have any answer whatsoever, you don't need answers. You think you need answers. You don't need answers. You think you do. What you need is him. I know that in the moment it feels like, why, God? Why, God? Why? You need to just answer that. Instead of saying, why, God, say, come be with me, God. Be with me. Be with me. See, God never promises he'll give us answers, but he does promise he will be with us. I told you about Kayla, my little girl who had the PIC line in her arm. It's feeding IV right to her heart. We're giving her meds morning and night. And most of the time she does really well with it. We let her kind of push the syringe in, with the flush and everything. It gives you the squeamish. If you're not into that stuff, you're like, ooh. She thinks it's kind of cool. And sometimes, though, it gets uncomfortable. And one of those times where she was having a hard moment, she was just, but why? But why? But why? Guys, I gave her the best answer. I Googled it. ChatGPT gave me the language. I knew exactly how to say it. I was like, honey, the medicine needs to go in directly to your heart so that it can go out to all the rest of you and heal you. Do you think that helped? No, because the answer didn't stop the discomfort. It didn't stop the pain. We think that we just need if you just answer me. No, what you need is him, not the answer. And that's what he promises to give us. And the proof of it is his sending of his Son. God demonstrates his great love for us, his ache, his desire, his willingness to be near to us, to draw near to us. He sends his Son, creator of the universe, to enter into this life, to live with all the suffering, all the struggle, all the challenge, all the frustrations that you and I face. Every category Jesus had to face, and he did it perfectly without sin. And at the end, he went to the cross, not for his own sins, but to pay the penalty for the sins of everyone who will ever put their faith in him. If you're not a believer today, this is what we want for you. We want for you to put your faith in Jesus and have eternal life. And as he raised from the dead 3 days later, you too will raise and be joined with the Lord forever, where there is no more suffering, because the cause for sin will be no more. But God does not promise a life now free from suffering. What he does promise is that as we inevitably face it, he will be there. He doesn't promise answers, he promises himself. So don't turn from God, but be as Job was. Put your hope in him and trust. Guys, you're gonna have those moments where you're gonna cry, why, God, why? But what did I do? I don't think I did anything wrong. And listen, vent it. Vent the frustration. Let it out. Tell your friend. Meet with some other believers. Talk with the Lord. He can handle it. Even if you're like, yeah, but it's just gonna come out in sin. Listen, I'm not saying go sin, but I'm saying let it out. And just as Job did, Lord, forgive me. Forgive me, I wasn't thinking rightly. How could I understand? I don't know why you're going through the pain you have, or the pain that you will, but I do know what he will do with it. And I know that you can have him through it. You know, at the end of a service, we usually end with an upbeat song. In fact, when we were preparing for this series, I was talking with the band, and I was like, listen, some of these sermons are going to cover stuff that the theological content by itself is already kind of heavy. And for people who've experienced some of the kinds of things that I'm talking about, it'll be even deeper. So it'd be great to try at the end, like lift it up a bit, lift the spirits. But as we were discussing it more and more, it's like, listen, sometimes it is good to feel it. Sometimes it is good for us to experience godly mourning and godly grief of the kind that puts its faith in God even in the midst of it. And there's no better way and place to learn about those songs than together with other believers and together at church. And so this morning, I'm going to pray in just a moment here. I'm going to invite the band to come on up. And we're going to close with a song. I get teary-eyed thinking about it. I have been well served by this song. Though you slay me. And it comes from Job 13:15. And it's a moment where Job himself is just weeping before the Lord. His friends breathing down on his neck, pointing at him and belittling him and telling him what a terrible person he is and how he caused the death of his children by hidden sin. And Job says, of God, though he slay me, I will trust in him. I want to pray and invite you to sing this song with us. Father,